Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. We'll be speaking with Reverend Kaleel Sakakeeny this morning. Kaleel is a pet grief counselor, and also he's CEO of Animal Talks Incorporated. He's joining us to talk about the different stages of grieving that pet owners may experience, how animals' deaths can compare to that of a human in our lives, what can happen if we don't grieve the death of a pet properly, and also how to decide if one-on-one grief counseling is right for you. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Reverend Kaleel Sakakeeny. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, happy to be here. Very, very important program.
Pet grief counselor. I have not heard of this area of expertise. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a pet grief counselor and the CEO of Animal Talks Incorporated, briefly.
Will do. We all have animals that we love, and they're in our hearts and lodged in our lives, and we adore them. And some animals are bigger than others. Their love is huger than others. And I once had a cat who was really a very, 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 very big love. His name was Cairo, and he was impossibly beautiful and wonderful. And he died painfully. And when that happened, my world tipped upside down. My reality changed totally. I tended to be off the rails. I'm not proud of some of the things I did. A little too much drinking, a little too much wandering. And I couldn't find anyone to help me with the pain. It wasn't that I had lost a parent or a sibling or a friend or a relationship. I lost a cat whose love was huge, and no one existed to help me move from pain to healing. So eventually I found a theological institute that offered the one and only program in the country in pet chaplaincy. I signed on with them. It was a 2-3-year course. I learned and became an ordained animal chaplain, and then in the process, a non-denominational pastor, which led naturally to my work as a credentialed pet grief counselor, because I'm saying, if I've gone through this, and I know people whose lives have been profoundly altered when the pets have passed away, there are going to be other people looking for somebody to turn to, someplace for help. And that's how that journey began, and this is where we are now.
We've heard the different stages of grief when someone passes. Are these stages of grief similar or identical when a pet passes away?
The stages of grief that Kubler-Ross made famous, people tend to interpret them in a rigid sort of way. There's denial, there's acceptance, there's bargaining. These stages are not stages. I like not to use the word. I tend to see them as fluid emotions, phases that we go through. And they can be everything. It can be isolating. There are secondary losses. We can feel that we're going insane. We can become impatient. We can lose the will to live. So I don't know that I would call them stages. I would say that they are emotional force fields, profound effects on our mind and body, making a natural reaction to loss that we go through. So there are many stages of emotional, psychological, physical feelings that we go through. I would classify them as, again, emotional force fields, or rather than just simply rigid stages that we proceed through literally.
When a pet passes away due to a prolonged illness as opposed to a sudden death or disappearance, does the grief differ?
Yes, of course. When a pet is sick, seriously ill and dying, we think we have a chance to prepare ourselves. And to some extent we do, neurologically and emotionally. When the death is sudden, of course, there is no ability to say goodbye and to hold the animal in our arms and have some final last moments of deep, profound intimacy. So there is a difference, but there is no way in the world you can prepare for a death of any being that you love, whether it's a long-term illness, which makes you feel that you can be prepared at the end, and you really can't. When that moment comes, when the last breath is drawn, when the final goodbye is there, there's no preparation. So, yes, a long-term illness may soften the process some, but at the end of the day, that grief is as sharp and as profound as any other kind. And it's an interesting story. Where this came to light very importantly was, and I think it was 2016, Pope Paul was making a pontifical visit somewhere, and he looked and saw a little boy, 10 years old, absolutely sobbing his eyes out. And the pontiff broke away from his retinue and all of the trappings that accompanied him, and went and knelt in front of the little boy and asked him what was wrong. And the little boy cried and said his pet dog had just died, and would he meet his pet dog in heaven? And it was like a great hush in the room, according to the anecdotes. And the Pope said, you will, my son, meet your dog in heaven. There is a place for all our pets and us in eternity. And that was a major departure from the Descartes or other previous papal edicts that animals had no souls. And when the Pope said that, when he promised we would meet up again with our animals, all the pet parents in the world breathed a profound sigh of relief, because he said what they knew, which was our pets are spiritual beings, and the connection between us is that deep and that meaningful and that sacred. So when that ends, our worlds change.
If we don't grieve the death of a pet properly, what can happen to us emotionally, physically, and psychologically?
We are a grief avoiding society, a grief illiterate society. We run away from grief. We shop, we have sex, we drink, we try. Grief is the opposite side of love. It's the same coin, different sides. If we don't grieve, and our society doesn't encourage us to grieve, then all of that loss, all of that pain, all of that longing, all of that missing backs up inside of us and affects us psychologically, neurologically, and emotionally. And we become really malformed in some way emotionally. And this is not just with pets. I see that the death of a pet is a portal into the many, many other deaths that have not been mourned. So when somebody calls me and they're talking about the death of their dog, they're really talking about the death of their parent or a sibling 10 years ago that no one gave them permission to mourn. And now the death of the animal is freeing them from that constraint and allowing them now to grieve the death of the dog, of the human, the father, the son, the whatever. And that tends to make them a more complete, freed, more liberated person. Because if you don't, that compounded grief, that carried grief can cripple and paralyze you.
How do we know if one-on-one grief counseling is right for us? Not everyone seeks grief counseling of any kind, let alone the loss of a pet.
Excellent question, Neil. I wish I could frame that and put it in neon lights because people are wondering. I would say, back to your question, when the grief is interfering so totally with your life, when it's not softening, when you move from pain to misery, when you move from pain to anger, when you have no reason to live, when you feel nobody cares, when you've lost any purpose, when that grief gets stuck, in a sense, when it just doesn't move and you're feeling more and more unable to function, then you need help. Because if you don't, it will freeze inside and totally affect every aspect of your life and render it impossible to live. So when that happens, the person really does need to talk to a grief counselor and get some help to move that forward, to soften the pain, and above all, give them a sense of hope that there is life and the love never dies with the death. We always remember, we always carry the love with us. Death doesn't end the relationship. Death doesn't end the love. And if they can move into that, then that grief flows and makes them more compassionate, actually makes them better people as they go through the rest of their lives.
I do believe that you had an extensive write-up in an industry magazine recently.
Yeah, there's a lot of people are not happy at the end of the day. They blame the veterinarians when the pets pass. Was it the right vet? Did he do the right thing? Then we saw that veterinarians have the highest rate of suicide of all professional healers, all professional caregivers, and women veterinarians in particular. So I wrote this major feature article in the magazine that veterinarians read. It's called Pet Vet Magazine, and it's urging them towards self-care. It's urging them to maybe look more deeply into grief work so that they're not just administering the euthanasia, but that they assume responsibility for what they're doing, understand that the clients will have grief long after they leave the office, and to help the veterinarians understand what it is that the pet parent is going through in that moment and for many months or years afterwards, and to become more sensitized to the long-term effect of what that vet did in the office, which is to euthanize their best friend, their loved pet.
Give us a website where we can learn more about grief counseling for our pets.
Hi. So basically, we have a once-a-month healing circle that we're running. This month in upcoming October, we've got a healing circle on the 22nd where people who have lost their pets can come together in an environment where they can share their emotions and speak to other people who are also currently going through pet grief. So that's on the October 22nd. And then on the 15th of October, we have an animal blessing that is completely run by Animal Talks Inc. All of it is on our website at animaltalksinc.com, and you'll find more information right on our site.
Thank you so much. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Reverend Kaleel Sakakeeny. Audio copies of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au, also at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.